Hello and welcome to another Doctor's Assistant 1 video. Today I'm doing a review of davros, Innocence, the first episode of the part 4, or part 4-part even, mini-series of sorts. That's a prequel to Genesis of the Daleks, and that going over Davros as a kid, which is very distressing to say the least, because, you know, it's the events of him being a kid to leading him up to where we see him, as I say, in Genesis of the Daleks. So, yeah. First of all, I'll be going over the packaging. You've got this sort of square thing with Davros in the centre, which is the sort of Terry Malloy designed Davros, and that davros starring Terry Malloy, and then Innocence, and then the slogan of this series is "Nothing dies of old age on Skaro," which, when you think about it, is really distressing because it's because basically the planet is nuclear radiation of sorts, or ensconced in nuclear radiation, and therefore people don't live very long. Big Finish audio, or Big Finish logo there, Doctor Who logo, and then on the inside you've got the disc as well as some writer's notes and some other stuff. On the back you've got a picture of Davros again, as well as the runtime, which is 75 minutes, so it's an hour and 15 even minutes, so a bit longer than usual. The writers and the bio of what the story is about. Basically, davros is a good sort of starting point, and sort of it starts off a bit weird, or a little bit weird in my opinion. Like, my major criticism would be that the beginning and the end of this sort of story is bookended by these sort of bits where Davros is talking to a Dalek about like being on trial and whatnot. So hopefully this review will be, I'll try and keep this as spoiler free as possible. But to be fair, that may have already been in the trailer for this episode, I can't quite remember. Also, a little bit of a thing, I'll do a overview of this series if or when I get round to watching, listening even to each of the parts. Like, I'll review each part individually, but then, as I say, I'll do an overview of all 4 of them as one series, because they are one sort of, from what I understand, one big sort of overall arcing sort of 4-part series, mini-series, as I say. But yeah, I think it starts a bit odd, and that I'm not a massive fan of the sort of intro-y, music-y thing either. Like, it's a bit sort of falls flat for me, but then again, when it gets going, it gets going. It is very dark, bleak, and that, but that's to be expected. I didn't expect it to be light-hearted or nice and sort of uplifting. Although I think Davros is about sort of 15, 16 years old, and so his older sister is 18, so she is a few years older than him. His mum is part of the sort of politician-y sort of board, and because basically this is almost like a sort of 007-y sort of war spy espionage type thing, but set on Skaro, basically. That's how I'd best describe this, and that, so if that interests you at all, then obviously it's a must-have. But that being said, because of that, it was a little bit difficult to follow at times, because there's quite a lot of different characters double-crossing each other and this and that. You know, everything that you think is one thing, it's actually going to be another thing, you know, because obviously that's what happens in normal wars. It's kind of to be expected, you know, the sort of normality of sort of, for lack of a better term, civil life and normal life without conflict and war are complicated, you know, and exacerbated, you know, because you don't know who is the good guy and the bad guy, and everyone who is on one side or the other thinks that they're the good guys, and vice versa to the other person, and that, you know. And as I say, there are some really dark twists and that, and you really see the sort of vulnerable side to Davros at the beginning, but then tonally he does sort of shift somewhat towards the latter end of this story. There are some things that he does that are just unbelievably barbaric, but then, everyone has this sort of almost sort of dark, sort of twisted, almost key sort of part where they make this one big sort of action, like what I mean by that is like there's always like every character is basically the equivalent of a volcano. They're just a ticking time bomb, and you're expecting them to explode at some point, and just sort of, in terms of their emotional sort of way they present themselves, because again, everyone's on a knife edge because you would be in a war-like situation, and so all the actors who play the parts of people in this, of the different characters in this, have been phenomenal in that. And there's a lot of different characters, and it's almost reminded me of like a Russell T Davies sort of episode in the sense that there's a lot of sort of domestics and that, but it's a lot more interesting in terms of the fact that it's based around this guy, but as I say, before he looked like this. So, before he's Davros we know, it's his mum, it's his dad, it's his sister, it's his dad's sister, it's, and that, and as I say, there's a lot of conflict and a lot of friction between people in the house and that. So you've got to think, even remove the wartime element, Davros basically lives in a very sort of toxic, very unstable, very unhappy, family life, plus the fact that there's the war on top of that. So, you've already started off life or your background and your home life at like a, sort of 7 or 8 or 6 or 7 of stress, let's say, as Davros, as a kid. And then you've got, the wartime sort of thing, which would heighten your stress and your sort of, your inability to be able to sort of be a normal kid, and that. And there are some moments where he shows compassion, of all things, early on, and that, when he's in the lake, sort of place, I think, and that he's quite quiet, he's quite reserved at first, but then I think what's more scarier is the latter end, where he actually shows a bit more of his sort of, for lack of a better term, dominance, and his willingness to sort of twist the knife, stab someone and then twist the knife. He doesn't just stab someone when they're down, he also twists the knife to get what he wants and that. But then I think it's because he's been so silent, so, so often pushed aside and pushed down and squashed like a bug and being helpless. And now this is his time to shine. This is his time to rise above the cattle, rise above the people who normally just shoot first, ask questions later sort of thing. There are bits where he's actually asking people, do you mind if I use this person because now they're dead? I need them as an experiment, like, his body isn't going to waste. And it's like, wait, what? Like, grotesque, just awful things like that. I think I found this Big Finish audio fairly easy to listen to for the most part. There were little hiccups here and there, like there were little bits where some characters were talking and I was a bit like, okay, where would they be now? Like, when it's usually the politician-y people. But I think that's kind of, the politics of the war is probably one of the more duller parts to me. The more sort of Davros mutating people and that, I think that's more visually sort of just grotesque in my head, that I can visualize it more, and because it's more sort of, it gives a better visual representation than, say, someone just being like, oh, there's a spy in the camp. Like, that could be anyone, but if you don't know a lot of the characters' names, or you can't imagine why that person would be a spy, then obviously it's going to be difficult to visualize, and his mum is just so manipulating, and the bits at the end, as I say, he does some really nasty stuff right at the end, and that, I'm trying not to spoil too much here. It's a good foundation, or it's good foundation, and that it's not perfect. It's not great. I mean, it's not, as I say, it's not perfect. I mean, the kid actor who plays Davros is decent, but you don't really see much of him, but that's mainly because, or hear much from him, but then that's mainly because at the beginning of the story, I think that's intentional to show that actually things are getting to such a degree by the latter end of the story that he's been forced to sort of come out of his shell, and that which is ironic considering there's quite a bit of symbolism maybe at the beginning of the story, as I say, with that one creature in the lake sort of place that he probably relates to, you know, a sort of creature that sort of stays in his shell, is quite introvert, but he's forced to be more of an extrovert. He's forced to have to push his way through to people and that, because people are not willing to listen to him and that, you know, and that, or take him seriously. And as I say, there's a lot of conflict between Davros, his mum, his dad, and his sister and that, you know, because obviously Davros is quite open and honest. You know, the very rare times he does speak up, he is very much speaking out against the establishment and against what is expected of him, almost mirroring the Doctor in that respect, but obviously considering the circumstances of the situation that he's in, unlike the Doctor, he is not able to run away from the war, where the Doctor does. Obviously in the Time War, Davros doesn't have that luxury, doesn't have that capacity or that ability or that confidence and charisma to be able to do that, you know. He sort of is stuck in this sort of hellish, nightmarish situation, and you could argue that almost makes him the person that he is by the time we see him in Genesis of the Daleks. But as I say, this is only the first sort of story, and that obviously there wasn't any Daleks, but I didn't expect there to be, but that is kind of annoying. There isn't any real sort of Davros being Davros-esque, like, you know, menacing or angry or how we perceive him, like, later on, but again, that's to be expected. So, but I don't know, like, there's not as much action as well. It's a bit more slower paced, and considering it's an hour and 15 minutes, some people might find this a bit of a drag and a bit challenging, because it is very much a character piece about Davros. But if you're a massive fan of Davros, then it's definitely worth, you know, listening to the whole hour 15 minutes, because it's a treat. I'd give Davros Innocence a well-earned 8 out of 10. Thanks for watching, comment, rate and subscribe.